It's been a really big week for Fallout 76 when it comes to news both out of the game and also in-game. If you missed some of my previous videos, we saw how the Wastelanders PTS began and several users were leaking aspects of that, but then just the very next day, how some of those leakers were getting kicked from the PTS, but also how Bethesda had finally resolved or come up with a solution to the past inventory steal hack. And they announced how users would be compensated, and I think overall most people are happy with that resolution. But now finally, to end the week off, we actually have some significant new teases and details around Wastelanders, this time taking a look at some of the new locations as well as specific factions that are appearing here, that being the two big ones with the Raiders and the Settlers. We'll talk about that, but also how in the near future some more of us will be able to play Wastelanders early, but also a story that you may have not heard of, how some users are actually trying to get people banned in Fallout 76, and how there's this whole mass duping giveaway event as a almost vendetta against Bethesda. It's a very interesting situation that has a lot of grayness to it, so I think it'll be a fun one to talk about. If you guys enjoy the content, you can get subscribed. There's going to be a lot more Wastelanders on the way, or just leave a like as it has been helping the YouTube algorithm as of late, especially on my past few videos with Fallout 76. But either way, taking a look first at Wastelanders and some of the new teases we just got from Bethesda. In this one, they give us background and explanation as to the two major factions, the Settlers and the Raiders, in a spoiler-free way, just giving us context as to who exactly these people are. Bethesda basically describes how these two separate factions came to Appalachia and banded together as a means of survival, specifically banding together as they had common goals. First, taking a look at the Settlers, we do find out that they will have their main base at Spruce Knob, and Spruce Knob is specifically now converted into Foundation, which will act as the headquarters for the Settlers. Foundation is a name we've heard in the past. In fact, this image was actually labeled as Foundation, and many people suspected Anchor Farm was the main base, and frankly, it was portrayed as so in the trailer, so if anything, this seems like a change of plans internally by Bethesda. Although I'm not complaining, as they're going from a farm to an otherwise actually pretty cool little spot, and of course, we actually have seen quite a bit of Spruce Knob in the past. We know there's going to be a very large underground area to go along with this, and this will, of course, be a part of this new settler base, as well as just some other interior shots outside of just this main gate. Although speaking of this main gate, it looks awesome. I really love the design of this one. We have to hope that some of these items will be buildable objects in-game for our own camps following this DLC going live. Thus far with Fallout 76, Bethesda has done a really great job at world design, and they're just showing that they still got it. This looks cool and like a place I do genuinely want to go explore. But it's also described how the Settlers are led by Paige. Paige was a former union head for a construction worker union that was based in Washington, D.C., and just overall, the Settlers are a hard-working and industrious crew, described in being well-versed in how to construct and run a city. And Foundation is very much so described as being a city. Later in the article, Bethesda does describe how at both Foundation and Crater, the Raider base we'll talk about in a moment, you're going to find a total revamp of the location, which is pretty clear. I mean, even if you just do this comparison from what it looks like in-game right now to this screenshot, it is night and day. But also there should be a lot of vendors here, as well as new crafting areas and a ton of people to talk to. And it's basically described for the Settlers how it'll likely be a bunch of quests where we seek them out and then give them a helping hand in the process of rebuilding. They know how to build, but we know about the area and some of the challenges that Appalachia overall will face. Which actually, speaking of, something I found somewhat interesting. Bethesda describes how the Settlers made a return because they heard that Appalachia might offer some refuge from the trials of the Wasteland. But from the main story of Fallout 76, Appalachia is literally a place where a plague wiped out all of the living people, and now giant dragon-like beasts are continuing to spread that plague and potentially still wipe out many more people. It's not really clear how our actions in the Fallout 76 main story did affect that, if we really did slow that down or cut it off somewhat, but I do hope that is something that is addressed, because from an outsider looking in, Appalachia does not seem like a great place to move. Although in fairness, I guess if your options are a highly irradiated nuke zone or a plague-infested area, maybe the plague doesn't sound that bad anymore. Although something else interesting I picked up on around this, it is mentioned how Paige is from DC. I wonder if Bethesda has any crossovers or discussion around certain notable DC locations, or even precursors to certain events we see in Fallout 3, which of course takes place in Washington, DC. That would be a cool little nod, and I wouldn't be shocked if this sets up somewhat of a framework for a potential next DLC to take us to DC. which of course would be a massive opportunity for Bethesda and probably sell a lot of copies of Fallout 76. People would be all about revisiting some of those iconic locations. From the images themselves from the settler base, there's not a ton to infer. You can see a little barracks in the background, and this gives you an idea of what the base overall will look like from the inside. It also looks like the settlers may be wearing a new type of outfit, definitely very construction-esque and fitting for their overall theme. But switching over to the raiders, we do then get a look at Crater, which of course will now be the revamped Crash space station. So when it comes to the raiders, something pretty interesting. Bethesda describes how these actually are the raiders that used to live here, left, and now are making a return. In the lore of Fallout 76, the raiders reside in the Savage Divide. That of course is how you meet Rose and do that questline. Initially, the raiders were just a bunch of wealthy tourists that were here on a ski resort, but then the bombs dropped, they all turned into raiders and started setting up little factions. Specifically, 5 gangs were located all throughout Appalachia, and these are big. They were one of the largest factions overall in Appalachia at the time. But then they ended up having several wars with the other factions, specifically the Responders, Order of the Mysteries, and eventually most of them got wiped out by the Scorched. And Bethesda basically describes how some of these gangs fled but now are making a return because they've heard about other people also making a return, specifically because they felt like other people were taking away their territory. The raiders themselves are going to be led by Meg, and of course based out of the Crash space station now known as Crater. But something interesting about this faction, Bethesda has described that outsiders who drop by this location unannounced aren't going to get a warm welcome, which does seem to suggest that there may be a bit of a process or a step you have to take. You can't just roll up to the raiders and like, hey, take me in. This raider faction poses a very interesting opportunity for Bethesda, as it could give us insight to some of the events that took place in Appalachia that we otherwise only got to listen to or read about, like the Scorched Plague spreading, some of the wars that happened before we exit the vault. Hypothetically, some of these members will actually be people who lived through and fought in those battles. There also is the question now, how does Meg, this raider leader, face up against Rose, the old raider leader, and now the last remaining raider in Appalachia before Wastelanders? Likely those two will play some role with each other, and I wouldn't be surprised if the Vault 76 Overseer plays a similar role with the newly found settlers. As far as this image itself, it looks awesome. Crater looks like it's going to be a very cool and interesting base to explore. I couldn't see anything that was there to like speculate about or anything notable in the background, but just overall it definitely looks like a pretty awesome one. Towards the end of this, Bethesda does describe how your interactions with either of these factions will be heavily dependent on your reputation with them, and specifically how they view you, and how next week they're going to be doing an in-depth dive on the reputation system coming with Wastelanders, which I'm actually pretty excited about. That is something we haven't really seen in a Fallout game in a long time, and I'm curious to see how large of a role it will play. Something else that is worth noting, now that we have a better view of these two separate bases, is reportedly a lot of the interactions in Wastelanders will be in instance locations. So if you do decide, hey, I want to take down Meg, then you can do that, and it won't affect everybody else because only you are seeing her in that version. I do wonder how this will work. Like, is it only going to be these doors, the interior cells, or will there now be some kind of loading screen as you enter into the city, kind of like how it works in Skyrim? To begin with, in Fallout 76, a lot of areas like this are very open and don't involve loading screens. I wouldn't be shocked if they implement them to actually have some of these features work now. Likely we'll find out as we get more gameplay around this, but it was something I was curious about while looking through all these images, trying to figure out exactly how this would all fit together. But Bethesda also shares more details on Wastelanders PTS. They mention how they actually invited over 500 Fallout 76 players to join the PTS, which makes me feel way worse about not getting selected considering that many were added. They mention how they've gotten a ton of feedback from it thus far in the past few days, but also that testing needs will likely grow, and we are looking to expand on the current pool of playtesters. We are planning to send out additional rounds of invites to the Wastelanders PTS within the next couple of weeks. So that is exciting. Hopefully over the next few weeks, some of us that didn't make it into the first round will get in on subsequent rounds. And also, just as a personal note for this, I really do hope Bethesda does have a review period or just a playtest period for media. Outside of the initial launch of the game and the Greenbrier event, this is not something that has been done for Fallout 76 thus far. With any of the previous DLCs, I was totally in the dark. I didn't get early access or a preview at them before anyone else. But with Wastelanders, I would really love to be able to, on release, just drop a fully fledged review, detailing a lot of the things you could do with this and just how good it is. I feel like there might be this problem where if people don't get this preview window, there'll be a rush to try and get reviews out quickly. And with it reportedly having such a focus on choice and consequence, it feels like to me that one playthrough wouldn't be enough to have a perfect understanding of this or how much replayability it contains. So I think this will be very interesting to see. It wasn't a huge deal with Wild Appalachia, but that wasn't as big as Wastelanders. And of course, there weren't nearly as many people curiously looking onward to that. Totally unrelated to that, we actually have a rather interesting scenario right now in Fallout 76's base game. How some users are trying fairly hard to get other users banned to prove a point to Bethesda. It seems like over the past few days, there was a smaller but still somewhat significant ban wave for Fallout 76. Not too long ago, we talked about some hacking issues where you could spawn in almost any item in the game, and as such, people spawned in those scrap kits that Bethesda created a while ago. Right after Fallout first launched, players quickly realized that after putting items in the newly added scrap box with that service, it actually just deleted them all. As compensation for that, after the fact, Bethesda actually inserted these little scrap things in their accounts. If you scrapped it, you got a ton of every kind of junk, a lot of very valuable items in game. And during those recent hacks, users started spawning these in and spreading them around from one account to another. Originally, these were labeled as Atomic Shop items, so you couldn't actually trade them, but there were some workarounds to that and some different variables with these spawned in versions. But Bethesda started banning players with this, which is problemsome or concerning for a couple of reasons. One, hypothetically, if you just traded that away to someone, like some of these users were doing, or even using the other hack that allows you to manually place items in somebody else's account, a seemingly innocent player could be banned as a result. So let's say me, particularly since I have a notable name in Fallout 76, somebody places a bunch of these little scrap kits on me, and then I get banned for having too many in this otherwise seemingly automated ban wave. Now, it doesn't seem like this ban wave was across the board. Some people that illegitimately or even somewhat legitimately got these items weren't banned, even if they had several of them. But the ban wave did anger users in Fallout 76, one user in particular. And as such, that user is now taken to mass duping otherwise unattainable legendaries in Fallout 76 and spreading them to, well, anyone. So these are a few of the items in question. This also from that previous hack where you could create your own legendary. Although some of those items were deleted, many of the 3-star legendaries were not, such as these. So now this user is duping them and giving them to anyone who asks for one, in hopes that it causes a even larger ban wave with a bunch of innocent people getting banned, and in turn actually shows Bethesda, hey, you can't just ban somebody for having something in their inventory, because you don't necessarily know how that got there. And as of right now in Fallout 76, there is a way for me to actually place an item in your inventory using a hack. It's the reverse of the inventory steal hack. So if you find people with some of these items or some of the others that are floating around, be wary. Who knows what will happen with this, if Bethesda will even ban people for having these, or maybe you have to have a certain amount. But it's actually fairly common on PC. I've seen this getting discussed and traded in many Discord servers. And also, of course, separate, there also is another widely known dupe that is somewhat effective, allowing them to create quite a few of these weapons. And although at first glance, this definitely can seem pretty cut and dry, black and white, it's a bad thing for the game, what this guy is doing is bad, there is a bit more nuance to that, as this is actually a user who has continuously reported issues or bugs, or been a member of a group of individuals reporting issues or bugs to Bethesda. And it's really reached a boiling point after many times reporting an issue or bug, it not getting addressed, and then that issue actually becoming much larger or going public, where Bethesda does have some kind of reaction, doing something after the fact to make things right, although they could have been proactive and actually done a preventative measure, because people like this were informing them about it before it was a major issue. So the way he explains it, after months of frustration around those preventative measures not being taken, or warnings simply going ignored until it is a much larger problem, he's gone this route, almost in a way to spite Bethesda and show them, hey, your system is messed up and it's something that needs improvement. And that's not to say that this suddenly becomes a good thing or a justified thing. I don't really know how I feel about it. There's some pros and there are some cons. Obviously, getting innocent players banned is not a good thing, but at the same time, Bethesda certainly has made some questionable decisions, in particular Bethesda support. And they have failed on numerous occasions now, especially if you follow some of the happenings behind the scenes, to take proactive action when they otherwise seemingly could have. And we'll see what happens in the future. If there are more bans, if there really is a big ban wave, or if nothing happens and all of these items are just now floating around, which are otherwise very, very powerful. It'll be interesting to see what effect this has on the economy, which we recently talked about in my real money trading video from last week. And one final note that I wanted to add towards the end of this one is that I think Bethesda's handling of this recent Wastelanders tease to be interesting. I really expected at some point we would get a larger, more meaty tease, but they seem to be consistently giving us a few images and some details, nothing super substantial at least thus far. And I mention this now specifically because there have been major leaks around Wastelanders. Every time I mention that, I always get a ton of comments like, where are they? I can't find any. You're just not looking hard enough. The Wastelander leaks are out there, whether it be on certain websites or even particularly around Discord. There are a ton of details out there right now, whether it be the new weapons, items, or even major plot points, or even tons of images sharing almost every aspect of this. Now, I do mention this because I would have assumed Bethesda would have a larger tease or reveal some of these otherwise secret things on their own accord to kind of get in front of this. I actually expected them to do somewhat of that today, because it's not like it's going to get better. Now the knowledge is out there. Some of that information is just known, and it's going to slowly trickle its way more and more so into the mainstream. Even if Bethesda deletes those videos and images, I'm sure as some major plot points become known, there'll even be users trying to spoil it for other people. So I personally found the handling of the situation thus far just to be kind of odd. We still know so little and have seen so little of Wastelanders, but now we're getting a ton of new information, but in illegitimate ways from people breaking their NDAs and leaking things. I would also argue the fact that they are still having rather minimal teases is indicative that Wastelanders is still a ways away, at least a month if I was guessing. But with all that being said, as always again, I thank you for watching. Hopefully you found this video informative, but with that, I hope to see you all next time. Later.